Hello, and welcome to today's Global Fleet Champions webinar. Global Fleet Champions is a partnership campaign administered by BRAKE, the road safety charity, to prevent deaths, injuries and pollution caused by vehicles driven for work. Visit our website globalfleetchampions.org to find out more. Today's webinar forms part of our Essentials of Fleet Safety series, giving champions the essential elements of running a fleet safety programme. In today's webinar, sponsored by eDriving, we will be discussing driver behaviour. Driver error contributes to many crashes and is often the main cause. For many employees, driving is the most dangerous activity they undertake at work. All organisations with employees who drive for work should adopt a road safety culture backed up by policies, procedures and effective driver training and education to keep their drivers, vehicles and the public as safe as possible on the roads. In this webinar, you will learn how to write and implement an effective fleet safety policy and driver handbook, plan and deliver an effective driver training and education programme, and access resources to support you. On your screen now, you should be able to see a multiple choice question poll, so we can find out your views on this topic. It is anonymous, simply select one answer and press submit, and we will discuss the results at the beginning of the Q&A session, which is your opportunity to ask some of today's presenters any questions you might have. You can put forward your question at any time during the webinar by using the chat box on the webinar panel. Thank you for your time, and the webinar will now begin.
So, good morning. My name is Ellen Townsend. I'm working for the European Transport Safety Council, and my presentation today is going to be looking at dangerous driving behaviours. So before I go into the presentation, just a few words about my organisation. The European Transport Safety Council is a non-governmental organisation based in Brussels, working at European level. We have about 60 members from across the EU. We're working to reduce road deaths and serious injuries across the EU. Unfortunately, the situation at the moment is not looking very good. These are the latest figures from 2018, and alongside that we have many more who are seriously injured. Now, what makes the situation even worse is that we've had stagnation in the road deaths and serious injury figures for the last 4 years. So it means either -1 or 2% or no change across the EU. So we desperately need action to reach new road safety targets, which have been set now to reduce by half road deaths and serious injuries by 2030. So looking at the main risk factors in the area of road safety, I'm going to be talking about speeding, drink driving, distraction, drug driving, and then at the very end, a new ETSC report, which was looking at how telemetry and in-vehicle technologies monitoring behaviour can actually help to tackle some of these main risks. So the first risk is speeding. So it's really the most important, well, very important, if not the most important risk factor. And Rune Elvik, this is the big professor academic behind the power model, said that it has a greater effect on the number of collisions and injury severity than almost all other known risk factors. So it can influence the severity of the injury and the probability of a crash. So why do people speed? Because they can. And here we have the speedometer showing this open invitation nearly to speed. We've asked drivers why they're speeding, and this is what they say. And this is exactly an example of one of the types of people that we're trying to reach. Obviously, this person is not an idiot, he's not arrogant, he will probably care about the people surrounding him, he probably sees himself as a responsible driver, but he doesn't feel any risk or danger when he's speeding, and that is the issue that we want to get at. We want to try to convince people and explain to them that speeding is dangerous. Unfortunately, it's still a very big problem. So these are figures looking at speed compliance, so the numbers of people who are not respecting the speed limits in urban areas, and there are similar figures for other types of roads, motorways and rural roads as well. So there are figures from ETSC's Road Safety PIN Performance Index program that's monitoring, in this case, levels of speed compliance. So between 35 and 75% of vehicle speed observations are higher than the legal speed. This is especially worrying in urban areas where there are vulnerable road users, and the chances of their survival in a collision with motorized vehicles will be affected by the speed and the non-compliance with speed. Also important to know that the effect of speeding in reducing travel time is generally overestimated by road users, and especially in urban areas, the time savings are particularly small because of intersections, traffic lights, congestion, and relatively short distances. So speeding is really one of the big priorities that we need to look at in terms of reducing road risk. The second big one is the use of alcohol, so drink driving. And here we have some figures showing that up to 1.5%, between 1.5 and 2% of kilometers driven are driven with an illegal VAC. That translates into 25% of all road deaths in the EU being alcohol related. If we were to have sober drivers across the European Union, ETSC has calculated that we could save at least 5,000 road deaths. So if you think back to that 25,000 figure. VAC limits, so the drink driving limit, is a very important tool in terms of reducing the use of alcohol before driving. At the moment, there are different drink driving limits across the EU, and nearly all of them are in line with the European Union recommendation. And that means that most of them also apply lower limits for professional drivers, for example, so 0 or 0.2 drink driving limit. ETSC's recommendations on reducing drink driving across the EU come from one of our latest publications from December last year, 2019. And I would just highlight two of them. So the main one is for governments to introduce a zero tolerance level, i.e. maximum VAC of 0.2 for all road users, and also, of course, to work to enforce that limit. And then another recommendation, which is very important in the driving for work area, is to mandate the use of alcohol interlocks, which is a tool that will prevent the ignition from starting if it detects that the driver has alcohol in the breath. So we very much also support the use of alcohol interlocks for professional drivers. Alongside alcohol, we're also very concerned about the prevalence of drug driving. So this is a more complicated area. We also have a report looking at drug driving from ETSC, where we're explaining that there are illicit and licit medicines. Psychoactive drugs in themselves have a negative effect on the ability to drive, affecting the cognitive behavior and the psychomotor functioning. It's not as well understood as drink driving. As I said, it's more complicated because of the wide variety of some substances. But as our report shows, the knowledge is growing, but it's still limited. So this really needs to be a priority in terms of research, but also applying the findings of the research, of course. How large is the problem? Well, we know that 25% of 15 to 64-year-olds have actually used illicit drugs at some point. But then if we look at that within the driving population, it's at 1.9%. So this is according to Druid, which is an EU research project. But then self-reporting figures are much higher. So 11% said, this is also coming from an EU-wide survey of driving behaviours. So 11% of those polled said they had driven after using illicit drugs at least once in the past year, and 22% said they had driven after using medication. So medication is, again, a whole other new field. So age and gender also affect this a lot. Here ETSC is calling for a zero tolerance system, so similar to alcohol, but it's different because drugs is more complicated, but we would like to have a zero tolerance approach for this. And also from the side of the EU, we would like to have common standards for roadside drug driving enforcement, so that there are a common approach is identified and then used across all the different EU countries. The next big challenge that we have is tackling distraction. So distraction can take many different forms. But the main one here, especially in the area of driving to work, is use of a mobile phone. So distraction from mobile phones will reduce reaction times in case of being faced with a risky situation, and it's a growing problem in road safety. Here the data on how many collisions involving distraction is quite poor. But experts estimate that it plays a role in between 10 and 30%. So we have figures, for example, from France, saying that 9% of their fatal collisions occur due to distraction, and figures from Ireland where it's up to 30%. Even though the phenomenon of using a mobile phone whilst driving is widespread, enforcement levels remain low. There are some technological solutions which could be quite interesting. So, for example, there are apps on phones which have a do not disturb while driving feature. But we still need to do a lot more, including also having the police enforce the use of mobile phones. And this next slide that you see here shows the numbers of tickets per 1,000 inhabitants across some of the EU countries. This is to give an idea of the size of the problem and also where there is enforcement going on. So coming to the end of my presentation, I wanted to present very briefly a report from ETSC published in 2018 on telematics, and how, so this report looks at how they work, how they can be used in a vehicle fleet, and also looking at what the research actually tells us. So very briefly then, vehicle telematics. There are different types. We have, for example, event data recorders that can work to monitor particular harsh braking, for example, and location. These telematics systems can be retrofitted, they can be inbuilt, or they can be used as an add-on, so using mobile phone, for example. They can be used to address key road safety issues, speeding, distraction, mobile phone use, so the topics, the issues that I have covered in my presentation. This then can be translated into risk rating for individual drivers, and also then that sort of data can be used with reward schemes. And it can also be used for the data that is gathered can also be used to help a company design its shift patterns or look at routes or identify risky time periods. So it can be really helpful. To make the most of the data, the report really stresses that you need to use the data. So it also needs to be integrated into a wider work-related road safety management program. So it can't be a standalone tool. You need to make sure that you're handling and protecting the data properly, and you also need buy-in from the director, from the top level, but then also from the employees who will be using the telemetry. The report finally looks at the extent to which this is actually working to improve road safety. So although the report points to the general lack of work-related road safety research, there's also a lack of telematics research. However, there was a conclusion from the academic research that telemetry can have a positive safety effect alongside other results, but it's very, very important to use the feedback methods that I just mentioned. And our report also includes some case studies to illustrate this use of good practice. So I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello everyone. I'd like to start off by thanking Brake for inviting me to share my thoughts on how to effectively use driver safety policies and procedures to help you manage driver behaviour. But first of all, a word of caution. You cannot simply take a good practice, policy or procedure and implement this into your business. This is not effective or indeed a sensible way to manage driver behaviour. I've lost count of the number of times I've been given copies of a company's driver safety policies and procedures, and these have little relationship to actually what happens in practice. I'll talk more about why taking an off-the-shelf policy or procedure doesn't work and is not a sensible approach later, but essentially this is all about ensuring that your driver safety policies and procedures are aligned with your operating practices and procedures. As I said, I'll discuss that in more detail later. So where do policies and procedures fit into your overall risk management program? I always think it's important to look at the bigger picture when looking at any element of work-related road risk management to ensure that you're doing everything necessary to help reduce collisions and claims in your organisation, rather than just focusing on one specific area. This is what a proven and effective work-related road risk management program looks like. It's based on tried and tested health and safety management principles of plan, do, check, and act, which many of you are probably familiar with. What's less common is to see these principles applied to managing work-related driving. You can see from the diagram that policies and procedures appear at the very start of the process. If you're starting from scratch, and I'm guessing many of you are, then there are some basic elements that you should include, which I'll cover later. But as a minimum, the content should be guided by the proven risks in your organisations, the types of collisions that you're currently experiencing. You'll see that post-incident reviews and root cause analysis appear in the check part of the process. But there should be nothing stopping you analysing the collisions that you're currently having to help you determine what areas your new policies and procedures should focus on. As your work-related road risk management program evolves, you'll be carrying out regular reviews to see if your current approach is being effective in sustainably reducing collisions and claims. And this will guide you in updating and modifying your policies and procedures. It's important to remember that these should be living documents to reflect the risks faced in your organisation, not something that you implement once and forget about. We don't have time to go into the other elements of this process today, but you can see from the diagram the areas involved. Incidentally, I've put risk of harm in the center of this diagram, but exactly the same process is used for managing the total cost of risk, the corporate social responsibility, and the risk of prosecution. If you get the process right, then the organization will realize many benefits other than simply managing the risk of harm. As I mentioned before, effective work-related road risk management is more than simply having good policies and procedures. So what are the key success factors? First of all, you need the right management systems in place. There are a number of elements to this. Firstly, you need to have the full support of the senior management team, who not only need to provide the right support for the program, but also follow the policies and procedures that you implement. If employees see the senior managers are not taking this seriously, then why should they? Equally important is the involvement of line managers and supervisors. They are the controlling mind of the employee and as such have a big influence over how an employee behaves whilst driving. You'll see that manager training is an element of an effective work-related road risk management program. I'd argue that training line managers and supervisors in their responsibilities and their roles in the overall work-related road risk management program is a more important step than training the drivers themselves. It is line managers and supervisors who should be engaging with their reports regularly to discuss safe driving, and they should be the ones who are carrying out post-incident debriefs to determine the underlying root causes. The most important question to ask in a post-collision debrief process is, what did we do as an organisation that may have contributed to this collision occurring? Never simply assume that the crash was just down to bad driving. Finally, when looking at management, we need to look at the safety operational balance. If there are conflicts between what is expected from a safe driving perspective and what is needed operationally, then usually the operational requirement wins out. This is why taking an off-the-shelf policy or procedure is usually a bad idea, as this takes no account of the operational needs of the business. When I'm working with a customer, often I'll be recommended they make small modifications to their operating practices and procedures to help create a safe working environment, to ensure that their employees, should they choose to do so, can drive safely. Now, getting employees to drive safely is the next challenge, and this brings us nicely onto the second key success factor, getting the right on-road safety culture. This is something that's very easy to say, but difficult to achieve, and takes time to develop. You need to have employees who want to drive safely, not because they have to. Even in organizations with well-developed safety cultures in their plants, factories, or offices, such as in the petrochemical industry or the pharmaceutical industry, it still takes time to transfer this culture out onto the road. Now, we don't have time to discuss the ways to do this, but as you see from the diagram, it's an important element in any effective work-related road risk management program. So what makes an effective policy? Before we look at what the policy should contain, I think it's important to see how any effective policy should be developed. All policies should be applicable. As I mentioned earlier, your policy should be focused on the risks you face rather than being generic. Understand why you're having collisions and align your policies around the outcome from the analysis. All policies should be achievable. As we've just discussed, employees must be driving in an environment in which they can drive safely. So your operating practices and procedures must be aligned with your safe driving policies and procedures to achieve that right safety operational balance. Remember, the most effective thing to do may be to modify an operating practice or procedure rather than have something in your safe driving policies. All policies should be agreed. Stakeholders should agree what safer policy should look like to take into account possibly diverse needs in different areas of the organisation. My favourite approach here is to facilitate a workshop where everyone can have their say to help develop a safety operational balance based on the organisation's overall risk appetite. Finally, all policies should be audited. If you don't check whether policies and procedures are being followed, how can you know if they're being effective? One simple way would be if you say that drivers should not speed. If you're getting notified about speeding offences, then this suggests that the employee has not been abiding by the policy, and you need to understand why. One final point about safe driving policies. I think these are far more effective when they are standalone policies rather than being incorporated into any company vehicle policy, as the latter normally focuses on the administrative issues associated with driving a company-provided vehicle, and the safety information tends to get lost. It's much better to have a standalone policy, as this sends out a message about how important the organisation takes this, and it also ensures that it is applicable to all employees, so it can be used by car drivers, van drivers, truck drivers, motorcyclists, and anybody using their own vehicle for making work-related journeys. So, other than the general things like aims, scope, authorization to drive and management responsibilities that should be included in your policies, what specific things should be in there? Well, we don't have enough time to go into depth in each area, so what I'll do, I'll share with you some of the main areas that I think should be included and provide a few insights just to give you an idea of what's involved. So starting with driver responsibilities, so this should include things like making sure that they have the correct driving license for the vehicle that you're asking them to drive, complying with the law, wearing their seatbelt and ensuring any passengers do so too, regardless of their legal obligations, and reporting any change in circumstances such as driving violations or changes in underlying health condition. Safe driving should include things like defensive driving, avoiding road rage, adapting driving to take into account changes in weather conditions and road surfaces, and things like safe following distances. Driver well-being should include things like fitness to drive, how medication can affect driving, and ergonomics, which should include achieving the correct seating and head restraint positions. Finally, on this side, journey management should include assessing the need to travel, the use of safer forms of transport, route planning and scheduling, carrying out dynamic risk assessments to take into account changes in conditions, and when overnight stays might be appropriate. This slide looks at the 4 main reasons why serious collisions occur. And regardless of any insights that you get from your post-incident reviews and root cause analysis, these 4 should always be included in your safe driving policies and procedures, as we know that these are significant risk factors. Speed management should include never breaking the speed limit and not treating the posted limit as a target. Also include examples of when driving at the posted speed limit might not be applicable, such as in bad weather or when there are many vulnerable road users around, such as in urban areas. Fatigue management should include the maximum length of the working day, including driving and commuting, when breaks from driving should be taken and how long those breaks should be, avoiding high-risk times of day, and what maximum distances can be driven in any one day. Impaired driving management should include the importance of being alcohol-free, along with insights on how to know this, the issue of morning after drink driving, and also being drug-free. I want to talk about drugs that would include recreational drugs, as well as understanding the potential implications of prescription and freely available medicines. Distracted driving should include the importance of avoiding all possible distractions, with a particular emphasis on the cognitive distraction of any phone call, and that includes hands-free calls, and the importance of never using your phone to message, use social media, or any other apps. As I say, these are the big 4 areas of my main 4 reasons why serious collisions occur. So they should be included in all your policies. The section on emergency should include what to do in the event of a breakdown or a collision, and this should be focused on keeping the drivers and passengers safe. So you'd include things like putting high visibility jackets on before exiting the vehicle, which doors to use, where to wait, etc., etc. The important thing here is staying safe and not the administrative elements of what to do following an incident, although this is obviously important. And this is a great example of many policies and procedures I see that are focused on the vehicle policy. They'll have what to do in the event of emergency in terms of who to call, not admitting liability, things like that, rather than the important safety information. So that's a good illustration of perhaps why this should be a separate standalone policy rather than incorporated into the vehicle safety policy. Personal security should include advice for vulnerable employees, things about safe parking, keeping doors locked whilst driving, and the issues about traveling to unfamiliar areas. Vehicle safety should include the importance of servicing and routine maintenance, and what safety equipment, and we're talking about both fitted, such as things like autonomous emergency braking, as well as ancillary safety equipment that you provide, such as high visibility jackets for all occupants of the vehicle. Remember, for all elements of your driving safety policies and procedures, they should be applicable based on the risks you face, achievable, so aligned with your operating practices and procedures, agreed by all stakeholders, and audited to make sure that they're being followed. As I've already said, I would not recommend that you use any off-the-shelf driving safety policy or procedure. As per our earlier discussions, it's important that whatever you implement is relevant and aligned to your risk appetite and operational needs. That said, here are a couple of resources where you can see what other people have done in their organisations that might provide some inspiration for your own safe driving policies and procedures. Here are just two examples. So we've got the Global Fleet Champions website that has lots of resources freely available, and also the UK's Driving for Better Business website, where some organisations have shared their full policies. Just to re-emphasise the point though, do not simply use someone else's policy as your own. It needs to be aligned with your specific situation, risk appetite, and operational needs. I've already mentioned the fact that auditing is one element critical for the effectiveness of any policy or procedure. If you don't know if something is being followed, how do you know it's being effective? But this isn't easy, as driving is a remote task. But there are some ways that you can get insights into this. For example, from notifications about speeding or other violations, from mobile phone records, from expense claims, and from manager and colleague observations. But what I want to discuss now is the fact that technology can play a part here. The use of telemetry data can give some good insights into how a vehicle is being driven. Data such as speeding and patterns of harsh braking and cornering give an indication that the vehicle may not be being driven as per your expectations, and allows line managers and supervisors to have a conversation with the driver to understand the underlying root cause of the observed exceptions and trends. As with collisions, the most important question to ask is, what have we done as an organisation that may have contributed to these exceptions and trends? It's important not to automatically assume it was just down to the employee's decision to drive like that. There may be an underlying management or operational reason why they've done that. With the proliferation of smartphone apps, telemetry is no longer just about fitted black boxes, which were mainly used in commercial vehicles, that it once was. Apps can be used by all employees, including those who use their own vehicle for making work-related journeys. Even in countries where data privacy is an issue, apps that provide trend data not linked to a specific location will give you valuable insights. We've covered a lot in this session. We started off with a health warning about the importance of not using an off-the-shelf policy in your organisation, as it's unlikely to be applicable based on your risk appetite and operational needs. We then looked at the wider work-related road risk management process and where policies and procedures fit into this, as well as some of the other key elements of this proven process. We then looked at what the two key success factors are. Firstly, having engaged managers and having operating policies and procedures aligned to safe driving needs to create an environment in which employees can drive safely. Secondly, getting employees to want to drive safely rather than having to drive safely is then the challenge by developing a strong on-road safety culture. We then looked at what makes any policy effective. Should be applicable based on the risks faced. It should be achievable based on the operating needs of the organisation. It should be agreed by all stakeholders who may have very varying needs. And finally, it should be audited to make sure it's being followed and is effective. We then discussed what some of the key elements of a policy should be, including the big four of speed management, fatigue management, impaired driving management, and distracted driving management. And finally, we looked at how technology can help you ensure that your policies and procedures are being followed through the use of telematics. Managing driver behaviour is not easy, but with the right management support and engagement and using a proven risk management program, this is achievable. Get this right and you'll save the organisation money in terms of the direct and uninsured losses associated with each collision. You'll enhance your corporate social responsibilities. You'll minimize the chance that the organization or an individual manager will be prosecuted. And most importantly, you'll reduce the risk that an employee or anyone they share the road with will be killed or injured in a crash. Thank you.
So I'm Adam Heintzen, the Director of Compliance for Acumen Waste Services Limited. I've been asked to talk about creating and maintaining a safe driving culture. The presentation will explore what culture is and contextualise where things such as fleet safety policies and driver handbooks can be used to create a culture that champions safe driving behaviours and by doing so puts people first. Now, a few stats. In 2018, 1,784 people killed and 28,122 people were seriously injured in reported road traffic incidents in Great Britain. Around 90% of road crashes involve some element of human error. Although educating road users can reduce the number of road crashes that occur, human error cannot be eradicated. Therefore, road users will still sometimes make mistakes that can lead to collisions. One way in which the number of road users killed or seriously injured can be reduced is by adopting a safe system approach, so that when crashes do occur, it is less likely that road users involved will be killed or seriously injured. Safe system is the generic term for approaches such as Vision Zero, Sustainable Safety, and Towards Zero. It is based primarily on Vision Zero, recognizing that human beings' lives and health should never be compromised by their need to travel. The responsibility to develop safe systems is outlined in primary legislation. In the UK, the Health and Safety at Work Act sets out the general duties to be followed and make provisions for the regulations and ACOPs to be made underneath the Act that provide the detail for employers to follow. The Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 states every employer must ensure, so far as reasonably practical, the health and safety and welfare at work of his or her employees. Section 2 defines the requirements even further and makes the way for further regulations, codes of practice and guidance. And indeed, the Health and Safety Driving at Work guidelines state that health and safety law applies to on-the-road work activities and the risk should be effectively managed with a health and safety system, as previously mentioned. Therefore, employees must conduct suitable risk assessments and ensure that work-related journeys are safe, staff are fit and are competent to drive safely, and vehicles are fit for purpose and in a safe condition. Unlike the traditional approach to road safety, the safe system approach recognises that human error is no longer the primary cause of incidents. Rather, a failure of the road system is the cause of many collisions that result in death or serious injury. It also shapes interventions to meet the long-term goal of zero deaths and serious injuries, rather relying on traditional interventions to set the limits of any long-term targets. However, there are barriers to overcome. There are three main barriers to preventing incidents occurring. They are plant, process, and people. The presence of one or more of the barriers will prevent loss events happening. If we have a gap in one or more of the barriers, then an incident can occur. The effectiveness of all three barriers can be influenced by a range of human factors. If it will fail to take account of these human factors, then gaps may appear and open up in one or more of the barriers, and thereby increasing the chance of an incident occurring. To minimize the impact of human factors, we should always be looking to eliminate hazards through good engineering, clear and effective processes and procedures, and only then relying on the individual. A company's culture can be displayed through clear, high-profile documents, that is, those designed to create an external image, such as mission statements, HSE policies, or annual reports showing improvements in HSE performance, and indeed, driver handbooks. However, an organizational culture is really demonstrated by what actually goes on inside an organization to keep and to get the work done. The way things get done around here means shared practices and communications, things we can actually see. Underneath lie more abstract characteristics of culture, values, beliefs, ideologies, and assumptions, both questioned and unquestioned, conscious and unconscious. At the start of this process of developing a generic safe system of work approach is identifying the hazard. It is helpful when considering the importance of communication platforms and introducing and/or developing driver handbooks and overarching policies, their place in an effective safe system. So what deliverables fall underneath these headings of plant, process, and people? Safe road use as safe systems involve both those who manage and design the roads and those who use them to be responsible for eradicating serious injuries and fatalities on the roads. All road users are expected to use the roads safely and comply with the rules. Safe road users are competent at the basics of safe road use, including paying full attention to the road, adapting to the conditions of the road, traveling at lower speeds, not drinking alcohol nor taking drugs and driving, not driving when tired, and not close following the vehicle in front, nor using a handheld mobile phone. The details of safe road use can be communicated using such things as fleet safety policies under the plant heading on the slide, and driver handbooks under process. That can be used to create a culture that champions safer driving behaviours, i.e. the people. Measures to encourage safe road use could also include working together to reduce traffic by inspiring people to use active modes of transport, such as walking and cycling, or use public transport rather than their own vehicle. Education interventions are also important to ensure that road users are risk aware and act appropriately to keep themselves safe on the road. Technology within vehicles, such as feedback from speedometer and seatbelt reminders, can also educate road users about safe road use. Now let's look at some practical communication examples. So the use of social media to communicate safe practices, working safely in driver handbooks and rules and agreements, hazard spot schemes and suggestion schemes with rewards, point of work or last minute risk assessments, well-being campaigns and surveys, and the use of driver telematics are all good practical examples of ways to create a culture that champions safe driving behaviours. Now finally, part of placing people first and ensuring their welfare is to look more holistically. Senior leadership have a role in ensuring the psychological contract of their employees is maintained and not violated or breached. A combination of human factors and Clutterbuck's description of the psychological contract demonstrates how if our people are valued in terms of worth, respect and belief, that we may experience fewer incidents and employees remain protected. There is no silver bullet to putting people first, but if it remains at the forefront of decision making, the HSEQ programs and initiatives are designed to involve all parts of the business and driven and supported from the top, then good people choose to stay with an organisation, and a safe culture becomes the very character and the culture of the business. Thank you for your time, and I'll welcome any questions.
Good morning. My name is Behaviour, and since May 2018, I'm a professor at the Centre of Accident Research and Road Safety in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. Before that, I worked at the Institute for Road Safety Research in the Netherlands. This presentation today is about training and education. And as you can see here, it has two purposes. It's dealing with competence and motivations and decisions. And I will cover both in this presentation. It helps you, education helps you to master a complex skill here so that you become an expert. Meaning, if you are an expert, you have learned to do something really well, and you can do that every time and very efficient. In this presentation, I will show you the basic principles of how to train a person to become an expert. And as a spoiler alert, The principles of training are easy, but the process to become an expert is hard. And we want people to be expert drivers. And that brings us to the second purpose of training, and that is to stay motivated to do the things in a safe manner, the way you have been taught to do so. And practically, for instance, that would mean not to give in to temptations, such as distractions from mobile phones, for instance. But first, before doing that, I want to position education in a broader context, because sometimes it's thought that we can use education to solve every and any problems, which is not the case. It only works if we design an environment, a working conditions in which people can show their good skills. And for road safety, that means that our infrastructure design should be very human-centered, that the task complexity should be low, that the situations are predictable, that the regulations are consistent, and also that the work environment helps us to remain safe. For instance, that we are not too tired to do our job correctly. And that brings us to the second condition that should be there in order to be safe and in order to benefit from education. And that is that we are physically and psychologically in the good conditions, meaning that we are not too fatigued, that we are not in a hurry, and in terms of personality, that we have the kind of people on the job that fit the task demands of that job. So think who you are hiring, because that can make a big difference. But imagine that we have good task conditions, we have designed it everything well, and we have the right people on the job. So how do we train them to be safe? But before that, I also want to show that training is a complex activity in that it takes a lot of energy, and sometimes and often it's far better to change the working conditions and the task conditions and for instance, the road infrastructure, rather than trying to change the people. And this is an example. What has boiling milk to do with, cooking milk to do with road safety? Well, Hayden was one of the founding fathers of the safe system approach, and he had this example in which he shows that it's far more beneficial to reduce the risk of people getting sick of unboiled raw milk, which is a health hazard, not by telling them to cook or boil, or what is the right word for the milk, but to make sure that the milk that they buy in the supermarket is already pasteurized or sterilized. So, and there are many examples in history that show that changing the conditions is far more easy than changing the people. So this is a reminder, but now we go back to training. And first we go to training skills. How do we become competent? Well, it's quite easy, by doing things very often. Practice makes perfect, but only, as we will show later, good practice makes perfect. And what it does, it decreases the workload. We don't have to think about what we have to do all the time. The behavior becomes more automatic, meaning the correct behavior becomes automatic. You don't have to think about it. And situational awareness increases, meaning that you automatically know what to look for and what hazards are there in the traffic environment. And we have examples of that, but also I want first to show that sometimes we are also limited by what people can do and what their capacities are still. And an example are very young drivers. And what we have seen in the literature is that very young drivers are not very good car drivers because of their limited brain development. They are very they do not know yet how to integrate all the information and how to control all the impulses. And we can see that in graphs, for instance, like this one, which I will not show in much detail, but which you can see in the webinar later, is that it has been a lot of debate about whether it is immaturity which is important to a reduced licensing age, for instance, or whether it is can we solve that by having more practice. And to conclude on that, we have seen that that we can overcome the limitations of immaturity also for young drivers by putting more practice in. And these graphs show that, but I will not discuss that in more detail. But as an example, I will show you a study that was done by a former colleague of mine about hazard perception and young drivers. And what he showed using eye tracking apparatus, that young drivers look at other situations than more experienced drivers. That, for instance, for them, hidden hazards are very difficult to spot. Here in the front, we see a young driver car in the image, and the red dots are the locations where the eyes are fixated. He's going to turn left following this green car, and he has to wait for the truck to come. Is given priority, and he misses the spot here in the corner where a potential hidden hazard might have been, because the lorry was covering that location. So if that's the case, can we help that with training? Yes. Studies have shown that if we train young drivers on hazard perceptions, that they get better. So showing examples like these helps them to look for situations in real life that might endanger them. To conclude on skill development, more practice makes more perfect. Lots of study has shown that, but only perfect practice makes more perfect. What it does, as I already mentioned, it helps us to have automatic responses. You can look at this in more detail. It's covering the system 1 and system 2, meaning system 1 is the automatic response. It's fast, it's unconscious, it's used in everyday decisions, and it's not so error prone, whereas system 2 is slow, conscious, and that's, when we learn a new task, we are slow, we need to think about it, it's very effortful, and we use that mainly for complex decisions, not for driving. Okay, so imagine we have trained everyone in the way they should be trained. Now the challenge is how to keep people motivated to behave and safely. And how do we change habits that might perhaps have gone wrong? That's very challenging. It's easier to train from the start in a correct manner than to change later when things have turned into habits. I'll skip this. And how can we do that? Once these bad habits have been developed, like, drink driving, speeding, perhaps inattentive driving, distraction, how can we solve that? For instance, well, we can inform people about risks. And sometimes that helps, but often it doesn't. Because there are lots of rationalizations people have why it's still not a problem for them to behave the way they do. So can we persuade them, get more emotion in it and more power in terms of telling and expressing and showing, for instance, in terms of showing the true nature of what a crash might look like? Does that work? Well, we come to that one later, but often also the power of persuasion can do a little, but it's not sufficient. To develop a new routine, we need to break the habit loop. And we need to do that in several ways. And we do have tools for that. For instance, we can help to change the bad habit by providing extra, benefits or punishment. But still remember that changing a bad habit is hard. It's very hard. Our resources are scarce and it's easily depleted. So we need change to be made easy and attractive for us, to keep up. Remember all your good ideas in January, what you wanted to do and how long those last. They don't last that long. So what do we have? Well, monitoring, in-car monitoring, we can use that to monitor behavior of drivers and give them feedback about how well they do. We can also use punishment. That often turns into a cat and mouse game. And it only works if the chance of being caught is very, very high. And it has often low acceptance. The other aspect, the other tool that we have is rewards. It's often perceived as childish, but it is attractive. People want to have little bonuses, of whatever nature, but not a lot of research has been done yet on it. But the research that has been done shows that in some conditions, rewards can be as effective as punishments. So we need to back up our efforts and policies if we want our drivers to change their behavior. We talked a little about fear evoking, to get more passion in it, to persuade. Does that work? Well, what we have found is it works in terms that it catches the attention. It's a strong motivator for change, but only when the harm is under the person's control. Otherwise, if it's not, then people reject your message. They find all sorts of rationalizations why it's not a good idea to believe what we think they should do. And often thought that for young people it would be better than other types of campaigns. It's not. So if you use it, make sure that you use it in a correct way, and otherwise stay away from it because it can be counterproductive. So in conclusion, what have we learned? Training in terms of skill acquisition, practice is needed to become an expert, and higher order skill, the integration of information, is hard for young drivers, but it can be taught, it can be trained. Education in terms of to motivate people to be safe. Well, we have lots of tools, inform and persuade, but still breaking habits is hard and difficult. Use rewards to increase their willpower. Willpower is a muscle, but it gets tired. So we need to back them up and be very careful with fear communication. And again, I show you the milk. Sometimes it's more effective to change the conditions rather than try to change a person. So in conclusion, training is something that we need in order to learn new skills, to become an expert in what we need to do, and learning is most effective from people that we trust. That's all from me for now. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Nick List. I'm Customer Success Director for Europe at eDriving. I'd like to start by saying it's been a pleasure for eDriving to sponsor today's webinar. I'd also like to thank all of the presenters thus far. I've been asked by Break to conclude the session today by sharing the advice and guidance that we would give to interested parties who are looking for technology to help improve the safety of their fleet. At eDriving, the first stage in our program is safety culture, and we always stress to fleets that no driver safety program will measurably change driver behaviour and maintain that improved behaviour without a solid safety culture in place first. The difficulty for fleet operators is measuring whether their safety culture is effective at changing driver behaviour, and this is where technology can help. Some fleets might already use telematic programs to help improve operational efficiencies, reduce emissions or cut costs. However, what I will share with you today is technology that can help improve fleets to improve driver behaviour, their driver behaviour. So I'll be briefly walking you through the program we offer and discussing how this not only helps to change driver behaviour, but also helps fleets to measure the effectiveness of their programs too. As I already said, some telematic solutions can generate a limited level of safety data, including an understanding of harsh acceleration, braking, idling and threshold speeding associated with the vehicle. They don't always easily tell the fleet operator who was actually driving, and specifically, it won't incorporate any insights into phone use, which is a key component when we're talking about driver behaviour. Typically too, it won't also be combined with any additional data insights into drivers collated from other sources, for example, the driver's license check or their collision history. It's only when you bring all of this important data together and compare your driver's performances against each other that you can really begin to identify the behaviour of an individual driver and proactively understand and take action with those most in need of any coaching support. The advantage of smartphone telematics over traditional telematics, or in addition to traditional telematics, is that it follows the driver regardless of the vehicle they are using, giving the manager consistency in terms of driver reporting. This means it can also be used effectively and consistently in any short-term hires and rental vehicles too, as well as across a multi-mark fleet. The Mentor by eDriving program is based on extensive research into how people learn and how we can change behaviours. It engages the driver and actively encourages them to replace their risky behaviours with safer habits. Uniquely, it also provides in-app coaching based upon how each individual drives to help drivers address any personal driving style challenges they may have. As I've already highlighted, smartphone telematics enables you to link driving behaviours to a specific driver, regardless of the vehicle they're using. Mentor works by using the existing technology contained in today's smartphones, for example, the accelerometers and gyroscopes, as well as GPS sensors to collect and analyse driving data. But it's important to stress at this point that eDriving will only report on how a driver drives, not where they drive. Absolutely no location data is shared with any managers whatsoever. All trips are automatically recorded once the app is installed on the work phone. They default to at-work use, therefore minimal intervention is required by the driver other than for personal or passenger trips. Data captured includes both positive behaviours and smooth manoeuvres, as well as any risky manoeuvres, including harsh acceleration, braking, cornering, distraction and speeding. This generates a score that reflects both trip distance and duration. As you'll see from the slide, the driver's score and colour coding associated with the scoring provides an at-a-glance view of driver risk. At eDriving, the FICO Safe Driving Score that our programme generates has actually been validated as being able to predict a driver's likelihood of a future crash involvement. For those of you that do not know FICO, it's an organisation similar to Experian here in the UK. But I have to stress the use of FICO is in no way linked to a credit scoring or referencing. We simply utilise their statistical skills to help us create the scoring. One of the key advantages of having a score like this as part of your program is that both you and your drivers can easily see how their driver behaviour is improving or declining. One of the crucial keys to the success of any driver behaviour improvement program is regular driver engagement. A smartphone-based driver safety program like this can also incorporate features to engage drivers in your safety culture and mission, providing yet further incentives for them to change their behaviour. In the mentor program, we have such a feature which we call circles. Circles enable drivers to set up teams with their colleagues and friends, and not only can they see how their colleagues are scoring, but they can also send messages to each other to help to spur competition and encouragement. Not only does this approach create shared awareness and accountability, it also helps keep the program front of mind, reinforces good driving behaviours, and help individuals improve together. Our program provides a mixture of both core training modules that are prescribed to all drivers and remedial training modules that are triggered based on an individual's driving behaviours. For example, a driver who speeds on the road will automatically be assigned concise training modules to their phone to help promptly address and improve this specific behaviour. Not only will the driver be assigned the module, but the manager will have the visibility of all training assignments on the manager's dashboard and can easily see completions across the drivers, the departments, and the overall organisation as well. These training modules can be viewed and completed by the driver within the Mentor app itself at any time. So they're really convenient to complete during 5 minutes of downtime, or similarly, they can be completed on a PC or tablet if preferred. Of course, I'm sure I don't need to highlight that the only time they can't be taken is whilst the driver is driving. And it's also worth pointing out at this point that Mentor doesn't allow the driver to interact with the program in any way once their vehicle is in motion. So, how do we help organisations keep the momentum for the Mentor program going? Of course, drivers will have the app on their phone, which they can open at any time to check on their performance, trips, and so on. And of course, there are also the circles that are touched on earlier. But in addition to all of this, every single driver also receives a weekly email summarising their on-road performance. This gives the driver insight into how their behaviour is progressing or not, as the case may be, over time. So it's really easy for every driver to see their own progress. There are many options for companies to incentivize drivers with rewards and recognition programs, including the Mentor Miles program that we are launching later this year. This type of recognition can go a long way to helping drivers change behaviours, as it rewards them for doing so and offers them tangible prizes when being safer on the roads. The slide shows a summary of the key features of the Mentor app. I've already talked about analytics, the FICO Safe Driving Score, training, and circles. In addition to these features, we also have two more key elements, which are first notification of loss, or FNOL, and vehicle inspections. The first notification of loss feature enables drivers to complete and submit information, as well as photographic support if required, to aid the claims and risk management processes, as well as help minimise claim costs. Whilst the vehicle inspection reporting features guide drivers through the regular inspection of their vehicles, prompting for any issues the vehicle may have. These features play a crucial role in helping to build an overall profile of the driver and add to the safety culture I touched on at the outset. For example, the completion of these can potentially be used as a trigger for a one-on-one discussion to help the driver understand any potential issues in their defensive driving techniques that might have contributed to an event. So much of what I've talked about so far is how the Mentor program is presented to the driver. But of course, it's also important to think about how the data is used by the fleet operator. For the purposes of today's session, I'll keep this really brief, as there's just too much to cover in the remaining few minutes. However, the data collected and analysed by the Mentor program can be combined with multiple other data inputs. For example, a driver risk assessment that helps you identify your most at-risk drivers. It can also incorporate collision and incident data, license checks, and pretty much any other sources of driver data, as long as it can be truly identified to a driver. Together, this data forms what we call a driver index. Driver index integrates this comprehensive set of fleet driver performance data into one system, providing a detailed view of driver risk across the whole organisation. All of this information is presented via a dashboard that provides managers with an at-a-glance view and also provides them with regular analytics. Whilst it's great having this data at your fingertips, we all know it's what you do with it that really makes a difference in terms of changing driver behaviour. We already talked about the automatic driver training provided, but this combined analysis of driver risk can also be used to trigger various other steps. I hope you can see that the data collected via all of these methods isn't just data, it's the trigger for a solution that helps to promptly improve driver behaviour and sustain these improved behaviours too. Just to put the programme into context and help evidence how it could help improve fleet and driver safety in an organisation, here are just a couple of slides showing Ecolab's recent experience of using mental by e-driving. For those of you who don't know, Ecolab's a company with over 49,000 employees in around 170 different locations. They initially launched a pilot for Mentor in just three regions for around 500 drivers. The programme identified that drivers with a score of below 710 were twice as likely to have a collision within the next 3 months. And during the pilot, the company saw a statistically significant collision per million miles reduction of 30% versus an increase in those that were not within the pilot regions. This was subsequently followed by a rollout to 12,000 drivers across the US and Canada, where they have the most drivers and see the greatest risk. But in 2020, Ecolab is focusing on a global expansion. As I mentioned at the beginning of the session, everything I've talked about today should be introduced into your company within the wider context of a safety culture. Our program includes all of the tools to help you establish safety as a corporate priority, including privacy notice, policy notice, driving guides, knowledge checks, and driver's pledges. That covers the basics of our mentor program, which is just one way of helping fleets to improve driver behaviour. We also have an extensive array of other resources to help fleets manage driver risk, including Mentor TSP, which is effectively an add-on that enables fleets with an existing telematics solution to incorporate driver behaviour insights into their program too. We also have Virtual Risk Manager, a risk management program that's been used by fleets around the world for over 20 years to help them reduce collisions and incidents, as well as various e-learning tools and license checking facilities. The information I've shared today has been a snapshot of how e-driving and our technologies can help your organisation manage its driver behaviour. I'd be delighted to answer any questions that you have or to provide you your organisation with a more detailed overview at your convenience. Thank you for listening today and safe driving.
Thank you very much, Nick. And we've now come to the end of the formal presentations and it's time for our Q&A session. It isn't too late to put forward your questions. Please use the chat box. And we do still have Andy, Devera and Nick on the line. And then if you'd like to ask any of the other speakers who are unable to make it today, then you can still send through your questions and we can pass them on via email. So I'm now just going to share the results from our poll earlier. So we asked you, does your organisation currently use telematics systems to monitor and address poor driving behaviours? So as you can see on the screen, 38% said yes, always. 31% said yes, some of them. No one answered not sure, and 31% said no. What I would like to do now is just ask Nicholas from eDriving to provide his thoughts and comment on these results. Hi Nick, can you hear me?
I can indeed. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that's great news to see that so many organisations using telematics. I do wonder, because it's slightly higher than I would have probably expected across the whole of the UK when looking at fleets. Sort of an experience that I've had when going out and talking to organisations, not that many seem to have telematics installed. So it's great to see that we've got so many on the call today. And I do wonder if we're perhaps a self-selecting audience with an appetite for road safety, and that's probably what may be skewing the results a little bit. But I'd be interested to hear the thoughts of any of the other speakers as well on that.
Yep, brilliant, thank you. Yeah, Andy, are you available to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I am, and I agree with Nick that that's a little bit surprising in that most of the organisations I have come across are not using telemetry for monitoring driver behaviour, and that would include even those organisations who've got telematics fitted to their typically larger vehicles, but they're using it for operational reasons. So even though the data is there, it's not being used. So it is encouraging, and I think Nick's right. It's probably a self-selecting group of people who bought into the need to manage work-related road risks, and that's why they're on the webinar today.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Andy. Yeah, definitely some interesting commentary there. So Nick, I'm just going to come back to you if I can, please. So the question was, which metrics do you recommend fleet managers should take into account when using telematics data to design bespoke driver training modules? Okay, well, obviously the metrics that I would focus on would be the speed in braking, acceleration, lane changing in cornering, and the speed versus posted speed limits, that is,
And where possible, bring in fatigue if you can as well. And again, if possible, the distraction metrics as well. So sort of prohibiting the use and then enforcing the prohibiting of use of mobile phones or any sort of communication devices and sat navs, etc., whilst driving.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Nick. So I'd now like to come to Vera. So in your presentation, you mentioned that organisations need to hire people who are suited to the driving task. So which attitudes do you find are best suited to driving for work?
Oh, that's a very good question. And to be honest, I wouldn't know exactly what it is, but I think people who are easily aroused, get aggressive, frustrated, and have poor impulse control are not so well suited for doing complex tasks like dangerous tasks like driving in traffic. Whereas people who are planned, who have overview, who are not easily provoked, are better suited for this purpose. So I would look, if I would be hiring people, I would look for that kind of personality and also try to stay away from people who are easily provoked. The other one is also conscientiousness, so that people are the people who are very well aware that their actions impact other people's safety. That's also some kind of a personality. They are better suited, whereas the people who have the feeling that they have the right to the road, who are, how would you say that, have the attitude that they should get what they deserve, have a very strong feeling that they should be in their right. That kind of personality is not so well suited. But to be honest, I think there are people who have a better understanding of the relationship between personality and safe driving than I have, and how to use that in a selection process.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your comments, Vera. We do have time now for one more question, so I'm just going to ask Andy a question, if that's okay. In your presentation, you discussed the importance of showing support from senior management, and I know that's a topic which comes up in lots of presentations. How do you think this support could be communicated in a meaningful way to get buy-in from senior management?
What, communicated from senior managers to the rest of the organisation? Do you mean, Sarah?
Yeah. So how can senior management show their support for the importance of these?
Well, there's a number of ways. First of all, they can make sure that there's enough funding in place for any initiative that the organisation wants to carry out. Assuming that's in place, then they have to give people enough time to engage in any training, for example, that the organisation decides that they want to implement. So doing the risk assessments. We've been talking about telematics a lot today. If the sales guys, if the van drivers, if the truck drivers have got telemetry systems fitted to their vehicles, then the senior managers should have exactly the same systems fitted to theirs. They should be subject to the same rules and regulations. But perhaps most importantly, they should be seen to be following the policies and procedures and the safe working practices that the organisation has put into place. Because I think, as I mentioned during my session, if the managing director isn't seen to be driving safely, why should I? That type of attitude. So it's actually it's very important that they actually follow whatever the organisation is trying to do. They shouldn't be above anybody.
Brilliant. So I'd now like to thank you all very much for attending today's webinar sponsored by eDriving, and we hope you enjoyed it and that you found the presentations useful. Our next webinar will discuss effective driver training, and this will take place on Tuesday the 24th of March. And you can also see on the screen some more webinars which are also taking place in April and May. So we really do appreciate any feedback you have, so please do complete our short feedback form which will appear on your screen once the webinar ends. And if you'd like to watch again or miss a part of the webinar, then of course you can catch up on YouTube, and we'll also have a discussion in our Global Fleet Champions LinkedIn group if you'd like to join that. Thank you again to today's presenters for your time and effort, and of course to our sponsor eDriving. We hope you can join us again soon. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you very much. Goodbye.